Órale! Bienvenidos and welcome to the Familia FFB podcast. I'm your host, Jorge Martin, and we are live on YouTube, Familia. Please make sure to give us a like and subscribe. We would really appreciate that. Also, please make sure you're checking out our original content at familiaffb.com. You can find me at Jorge Martin17 on Twitter, and let's get into it, Familia. Today we have a guest who is muy especial. Jefe Bell. He is one of the truly good guys that I've met in the past year in the fantasy football space. He started creating content just a little bit more than a year ago, and he's already written for big sites like Fantasy Pros before recently accepting a position with Football Guys. So he's a staffer there, and he's also the co-host of the Devi Royale podcast, and they go into really deep dives into the college football game. So which is when we really right now is when we're really starting to get excited about those prospects that are coming up in the NFL draft. So we are going to tap into that knowledge with Jefe. Please make sure to follow him at one of my favorite Twitter handles, at For Whom Jefe Bell Tolls. And aside from all the fantasy football content and all the tweeting and everything, somehow he finds time for his day job as an accountant. So we are getting him before his busy season comes in. And something that's always keeps him busy is being a dad. He's got he and his wife recently had another addition to the family, a little girl. So I love girl dads. So right now, bienvenidos to mi amigo, el jefe, Jefe Bell. Jefe, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Jorge, thank you so much for having me on. I'm so grateful to be able to share this platform with you. You know, you're somebody that I've been so fortunate to connect with in the space, and you've always been so very supportive, and everything that you've put out has been fantastic. And so just thank you again for the opportunity to come on with you here tonight.
Oh, thank you, Jefe. I can't thank you enough. I mean, it's so good to hear from somebody else who's grinding and putting stuff out there, to see that, that people are reading it and enjoying it. I mean, I do get some comments here and there, but it's always good to hear it live from peers, people whom you really respect in this game. And but first off, before we get into the NFL draft stuff, I mean, epic Sunday of football. Now I know Familia, all of you who follow Jefe know that he's a big Bills fan. So I know he smashed a few tables 8 days ago. So well deserved. But I will say before we get into the Sunday games, you got to feel better knowing that you got that unicorn. That unicorn playing quarterback for you. How does number 17, knowing that guy is so young, how does that make you feel as a Bills fan?
It's phenomenal. I'll go back and forth, but I tend to believe he's the best quarterback in the NFL. Maybe I'm biased in that take, but you see the things that he can do on the field, and you mentioned it. He's a unicorn. He's one of a kind, and that just gives you so much belief and hope as a fan base that. This is a fan base that it's not easy for us to believe, and it's not easy for us to hope, because we had the disappointing losses, and the Four Falls of Buffalo are on Disney Plus, and I watched it this past weekend, and because we love Bills fans love to torture ourselves, and you can see my guys behind me. So going back and then just nothing for 20 years, there was a real drought there, and to have a guy that we just fully believe in, that we know, once you kind of graduate those levels of being a fan of, like, you're not so much worried about, are we even going to make the playoffs? You're immediately worried about winning the division and playoff seeding and things like that, because and then how is it going to shake out when we get in there? Now, obviously they had the loss 8 days ago, which was probably the most painful football game of my entire life, and maybe that's because it's just so recent, but at the same time, it really felt like everything was pulling together and the Bills would be able to make a real run. You call me salty if you want to, but I'm thankful to see the Bengals in the Super Bowl. And, it's one of those things that I think one of the things that gets lost in the story, and especially the budding rivalry between the Bills and the Chiefs, is that we traded that draft pick that became Patrick Mahomes.
I know.
And I think it's one of those that it just feels like a curse on this franchise of we've traded this guy away. We've lost him in the playoffs the last 2 years, and he's the same age as our quarterback, but Josh Allen is a guy that gives you that hope and belief that we'll get one of them.
I really think it's just a matter of time. I mean, Josh Allen is so young. He's so dynamic. I mean, I sit there, and if I was talking about this, we had Sam Wagman, our fellow thief, on last week, and we talked a little bit about how the AFC is really, really stacked up with young quarterbacks. You got those two guys that you just talked about. Justin Herbert in my backyard over here for the Chargers, I think is. It's funny. I was talking with one of my primos, my cousins, and I was saying, what Mahomes and Allen did in the divisional round felt like what Justin Herbert kept doing in that, in the fourth quarter of that Raider game where he just kept converting. And it's just like those guys, and I don't see too many. I don't see those guys at least fully formed yet and developed in the NFC. So this could be just like an Avengers Civil War where everybody's fight. Where you got these behemoths just banging away at each other, and it's just. I think it's going to be special. I think it's going to be special, and I will say, as a Ram fan, I much rather see the Bengals than the Chiefs and the Bills. So
I would imagine, I don't blame you for that, and it really reminds me of, I don't know if you like basketball or not, or if you're an NBA fan or not, but how the Western Conference was just so stacked up for all these years. Whereas like you had LeBron out of the East, and it was like almost like nobody in the East was really even competing with him. Meanwhile, you had the stacked Lakers teams, and you had the Suns, and you had the Spurs, and it was like, it just almost feels like that's going on in the AFC NFC right now, where your guy Matthew Stafford might be the best quarterback in the NFC simply by default, depending what happens with Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady here. Whereas the AFC just seems like you're going to have Justin Herbert missed the playoffs this year, and Lamar Jackson missed the playoffs this year, and Deshaun Watson's not even playing right now. So it does kind of remind me of that, just that stacked stacked Western Conference in the NBA that we saw for a lot of the last couple decades.
Yeah, and I think what's gonna happen, and actually, I think we're actually set up to have a pretty good Super Bowl. I know the Rams are 4-point favorites. I know there's going to be a lot of talk about the Rams defensive line against that offensive line of the Bengals. Now, you got to see a couple Bengal games, 1 or 2 Bengal games this year live, right?
I went to the Bengals-Chargers game, so
okay.
I was able to go see the Bengals live. That was one of those. It was just you didn't really think that you're seeing a Super Bowl team at the time, especially they lost that game, and that was one of the classic games of the regular season, if you remember back, because it was really back and forth, and the Chargers went out to a big lead. Much like we've seen these playoffs, the Bengals were able to scrape and claw, get their way back into it. Ultimately, the Chargers ended up pulling away, but it just speaks to that depth of talent that is involved in these AFC teams, especially these young quarterbacks. And, the Bengals really feel like a team of destiny right now.
And they really do. I mean, I'm not discounting them in any way, shape, or form. I think they're going to be, I think it's going to be a bit of a dogfight. I do wonder if Aaron Donald, Von Miller, and Leonard Floyd get enough hits on Burrow, enough sacks, maybe 10 sacks it'll take to be able to not knock them out, but just not have them come back and win. And I think the Rams will be able to make enough plays offensively against that defense. That's really they really showed up a lot in the second half last. I don't know what they did. I didn't look at the all 22. I don't know what they did to really shut down Tyreek Hill in the second half. I mean, they made him disappear. I don't think he saw a target in the second half. That was
what they did a lot of. They rushed 3 guys, and they sat 2 spies back, and so they were having these guys back sitting on the crossing in the middle routes that the Chiefs are so successful on. With they run Travis Kelce in the middle there, or they've got Tyreek Hill coming across the middle of formation. They put 2 guys back in those lanes, and that kind of took away that underneath. I think there is something. Patrick Mahomes has had such an up and down year. I think early in the season, people were so worried about him that had the league figured him out. He got hot a little bit, But I think the biggest difference that when I watched the Bills game versus what the Bengals did, the Bills kind of gave them those underneath routes, and the Bills said, well, we don't want to get beat deep on one big play. Whereas the Bengals kind of took the opposite approach, and they said, we're going to clog the middle of the field. We're going to take away these things that you're comfortable with. If you're going to go over the top and beat us, go right ahead. And then the second half, Mahomes seemed a little bit gun shy on doing that. Ultimately, he tried to do that on the play that resulted on the interception in the overtime.
Yeah, that one was that whole thing. I mean, it actually gave me a little bit of, oh, maybe these guys could do something similar to Stafford and Cup in this next game, because even though they were able to get loose a little bit. I mean, Cup was able to get loose and had a great game yesterday against the 49ers, against their defense, which, I mean, their secondary, which is one of their Achilles heels, and so did OBJ. I look at that and it's like I still kind of wonder, is that enough of kind of like for the secondary, is that enough of an Achilles heel for the Bengals, and can they still just rush three guys and get home? I don't know. I mean, Whitworth did get beat a couple of times, once yesterday, but I don't know if they're going to be able to do that. I mean, especially they've gone up against two of the best pass rushes in the last two games. I don't know if they're going to be able to just get home with three guys next time. And I think that's going to be I think so much is going to be said in the trenches in this game.
Yeah. That's where I kind of landed the same. And they don't have to do that, because Patrick Mahomes has that running threat that Matt Stafford doesn't bring. And so, but conveniently for you, nobody decides to cover Cooper Kupp. And so he's able to run wide open for 200 yards every game somehow. And, that always seems to work in your favor. But it does remind me a lot of the Chiefs Buccaneers Super Bowl of last year, where we kind of were looking at it as the Chiefs have these flashy weapons and they are able to put up points. And then you get into the game and you realize this game is going to be won in the trenches. And I don't know. I'm this Bengals squad. I feel like nobody can count them out at this point, especially after being down 21-3. But you touch on it with the guys, with Leonard Floyd, with Aaron Donald, and then with Von Miller too, adding that pass rush. It just kind of seems like it's set up that they're going to be able to control the line of scrimmage and get in Joe Burrow's face. Is the stage going to be too big? This is a guy, he's won the national championship, and it hasn't seemed like the stage is too big for him at any level. And I do think that from a Rams point of view, I think concern comes in potentially. Matthew Stafford has a tendency to make the Matthew Stafford play. And, he did it on Sunday. Dart just dropped it. But it does kind of seem like I've been watching this guy on Red Zone for the last 15 years. And it's one of those that you get a good feeling about it. And then the back-breaking interception comes. So, yeah, it's going to be a great game.
I think it will. I mean, I do. I mean, obviously, just from a fan stand. I mean, taking the fan outside, being outside of the fan, I look at it. I love that the Rams were able to get kind of like the monkey off their back with the whole McVay against Shanahan thing, and but I think more importantly, they won a real dogfight yesterday. And that to me was special, because that game was, I mean, those guys were just punching each other all over the place. And I thought it was to be able to win that game and come back in that game against probably the best defense they're going to see all season, at least from a defensive line standpoint, defensive line and linebackers. I don't know about the secondary, but really just that's what made it special on that one, just to be able to win that kind of game. Because I think they kind of let up a little bit in the second half of the first game against the 49ers, and definitely the second half against the Buccaneers. So playing 4 quarters was very important. I think they learned that lesson, and I think that's what they're going to need to take into this next one. So love it. I'm pumped. This is Familia. This is just an appetizer for everybody. All the ad nauseum talk that's going to be happening about the Super Bowl. But I wanted to ask a question about now you're a year into creating fantasy football content, because I think you said you started like in December of 2020.
That is, yes. Yep.
And so what kind of valuable lessons did you feel like you learned that you're going to kind of take into this second full year creating content?
So anybody that is looking to progress, the biggest thing, we talk about networking in the space, but really it encompasses different things because it encompasses being able to make relationships with people like yourself and people who are supportive and will be friends and will be there, but also being able to network with where you want to go next. And I think that a lot of people, they kind of fall into the plan of like, well, I just want to go to any big site. And I think that doesn't really work that way. I think that you need to tailor your content and have a site that you really enjoy and tailor your content to fit within that voice of that site and show that site that you can be a valuable addition to that team. And I think that that's so important. And my biggest takeaway too is compartmentalizing and really focusing when you set time aside and get things done, but also to have that balance within your life. It's a struggle for me, and it was a struggle for me. I really struggled, I'll admit it, through the spring and the summer last year, where I was just pushing so very, very hard to get content out because it was a new thing. I was throwing myself fully into it. While meanwhile, I'm also juggling a day job, and then I've got family too. I've kind of reached the point in November, December, late October, where I said, "What am I doing here? I got to make sure that I focus my time and my effort when I put it into this." But at the same time, like, it's so easy to look at your phone when you get home with your kids, I feel like, because Twitter's like right there. And just taking that time and saying, no, like, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to take, I don't want to miss my kids growing up. And so I think those are the biggest things. Networking is so important. Work very hard, but at the same time, target that work and make sure you're being productive in those areas and you're not really spinning your wheels out.
And I can tell you about how those years go by quickly. I mean, I've got my daughter who's a senior in high school, and she's getting college acceptances and everything, and it's
Yeah.
just sinking in all the time that this is coming. This is coming. She's going to be flying the nest. She's going to be living a whole different life, and we're not going to have her here at the dinner table every night. So it's and I remember very, very early on. I think she was about 3 years old. We were at a restaurant. This man tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Don't blink." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Don't blink because I blinked when my daughter was her age." And then he pointed to his daughter who was probably 30. He goes, "Now she's this age." And I just thought, wow. And it's true. It is true. But yeah, even enjoy the crazy baby days where where they're not sleeping, because we do laugh about them right now. So I don't know how much laughing you're doing right now.
The baby's fantastic. So the
That's
baby
awesome.
was sleeping through the night at like 6 weeks almost. So the baby is great. It's the middle one. It's so I have 3 daughters. I have a 6.5 and a 3.5, and then the baby. The baby will be 5 months here tomorrow, and so the baby's been great. It's the 3.5-year-old that comes raging in at 4 o'clock in the morning for no reason at all, and you try to reset her and get her back to bed. And some days that that's not going to happen. Some days she'll play in her room, but that's really the struggle right now.
Oh man. I remember people talking about terrible twos. And I was like, no, it's not terrible twos. It's 3. That's the worst.
It's
When
like the
they're
moment we
3,
got her out of her crib, because like when she was in her crib, it's like she would grab a book and she'd go back to sleep, and we'd see her at 9 in the morning. It's like you put her in that big girl bed, and she's got the freedom of the world. So that's been our struggle.
oh man. Oh, I just yeah, I'll light a candle for you. A veladora, so my friend. Oh, Dios mío, I know exactly what you're saying. I know I've still got the scars from it, but
That's right.
man. Well, let's talk a little draft. So
Yeah.
you guys have been on the Devi Royale podcast. You guys have been banging on this for months, and you guys already have the guys. I mean, I listened the other day. You guys did a mock Superflex draft, and you've published mock first rounds and everything like that. that's what a lot of the chatter is going to be over the next 3 months. We got the combine coming up, free agency, so teams are going to be able to open up, show what they're going to be looking at, kind of show their cards a little bit about what they're going to be going there. See, I play on words there with your Debbie Royale.
That's right. I appreciate that.
But you get so much of the importance, and actually this is kind of an important week because you got the East-West Shrine game on Thursday and you got the Senior Bowl on Saturday. How should we be watching those games this week, especially since there's no Super Bowl and the Pro Bowl is really just flag football?
Yeah, and the Senior Bowl can be kind of that too, where a lot of focus is going to be on 1-1. They're not really running complex concepts. They're trying to get guys in a situation where a defensive back is manning up with a wide receiver and seeing who can win in those situations. And you'll see a lot on Twitter here this week where there will be clips of 1-on-1 drills in practice, and that's a little bit different because these DBs, I feel so bad for them because there's no pressure on the quarterback, and these wide receivers just have all the time in the world to win on these routes. And so they're able to do that on the 1-on-1s. When it gets into the game a little bit more, then there's a little bit more, you got a safety over the top and you're not blitzing. They don't allow blitzing in these games, but there is some pressure on the quarterbacks. But what you're really looking for is who can win individual battles, who can create separation for wide receivers, what running backs, they really try to put running backs in the situation where they're catching the ball, where they're blocking. They really try to simulate, and they do play a game, but simulate game situations as much as possible. Quarterbacks, you're looking for ideally ball placement. Are they putting the ball where they need to on the route so that the wide receivers can win? But really winning 1-on-1 drills.
Okay. So that and does it feel like one is a little bit has more marquee names in it than the other?
The Senior Bowl is definitely more marquee. It's become it's the marketing around it's been great, but they've also done a great job of getting key players. And you look at the quarterbacks that are involved this year, it's really every quarterback that you want to see except for Matt Corral that is going to be there. And so the prestige on the quarterbacks at the Senior Bowl, especially this year, but the other positions, it's a little bit ironic because the best players don't necessarily play in the Senior Bowl because ideally your best players aren't seniors. Your best players are showcasing those abilities. And that's often what you see early in the draft will be underclassmen that have showcased that within their first 2 or 3 years, especially at a bigger program. It's kind of a problem if a guy is a senior at an Alabama or a senior at Ohio State because he's not showing that ability to advance and go on to the NFL. So it's really key in, like last year, Javonte Williams, Michael Carter were in the Senior Bowl. Najee Harris practiced, but he didn't play in the Senior Bowl. So you'll get Devonta Smith was a similar situation. He was at the practices. So you will get some guys that are going to be your top guys, but like Jamar Chase obviously wasn't there last year, and Kyle Pitts wasn't there last year, and Trevor Lawrence and those guys.
Yeah, that was the thing. I remember, no Lawrence, but you don't. I think at one point they talked about inviting the underclassmen, but I think they just decided to keep it the Senior Bowl. Now, when it comes to kind of like, what is kind of your process when it comes to studying these guys now that we're out of, or how would you recommend somebody who, as we talked about, are kind of coming into it right now? Is it like watching film on, with YouTube highlights or watching the combine? What way would you recommend people kind of learn?
So Caddy's Cut Ups, CADDY. Their Patreon is $1 to join, and you can get all 22 filmed through that. It's a great database that you're able to access and watch all 22. if you don't do that, YouTube's a great option as well, just to be able to get your eyes on, get comfortable. Some websites, the FF Astronauts, the film room is pretty good, that they'll do condensed clips. In the Devy community, Brandon Lejeune, the Devy Deep Dive, he does a really good job of breaking up games, and he'll have YouTube clips that you can watch. Of course, watch my show, the Devy Royale, and Kevin Coleman has been doing a great job with 5-minute videos coming out about he's kind of looking at Devy prospects. We're going to have a whole bunch more of those coming out, looking at the guys in the draft, and you'll see some tape there. Twitter's another good resource. Search a player name and you scroll over, you can look up video, you can see different videos of him doing things. But there's so many options that are available right now, so that makes it great. I tend to lean on being a film guy compared to a analytics guy. It's just one of those that, especially early in the process, just watch a lot of football, and you can kind of see the things that you want to see. Whereas like the information that's available, especially early in the process, you're looking at the production off last year, and that's great. And there's metrics that can come off that, but you're really waiting for the combine to see what these guys are going to run. We got some measurements this week, finally some real measurements, and it's really wild the difference that a guy will be listed in a college program, like a Jalen Tolbert, for instance. He's from South Alabama, and he was listed as a 6'3" wide receiver. And you watch him, South Alabama, at a small school against some of these smaller defensive backs he's going against, and it gives you vibes of a Cortland Sutton. That's a smaller school, a bigger wide receiver. Well, then he shows up at the Senior Bowl and he measures in, and he's 6'1" and he's 185, and you're like, well, that's a far cry from the guy that I thought I was watching, when I thought he was 6'3", 210 or whatever it was. And so I think that's analytics, I think, are important and they play a part. It's just one of those things that you're waiting to collect some of the data on that. And especially one of the biggest data points on that is draft capital. And so that's kind of, you're waiting until the NFL draft really to determine. And I think it's great to have the amateur lens and make your ranks. But I think that you need to realize and recognize that NFL teams, like, this is their livelihood, and they've got entire staffs of 8 to 10 guys that are doing this year round, 60, 70 hours a week, especially at this point of the year. And so while we want to think that we know more than an NFL team, and there might be some teams that we do know more, I think that you need to, as a community, we need to lean on the scouting that is actually done from the NFL.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I mean, you want to see what the guy does at that level, because especially when you get into some of the guys that maybe aren't playing in the SEC and they put up these huge numbers, and you're like, well, what does that mean? It's like,
Yes.
It's like in the NFL, when I forget who it was. I think it was maybe the Patriots went through a stretch where they were like the best defense in football. But then I looked at the quarterbacks they were facing during, those 6 or 7 games, and it was like I didn't see an elite quarterback in there at all. So that's the big thing. So don't look at your eyes.
Yeah, and it even goes to the other end too, because I remember when J.K. Dobbins in 2019, when he was Ohio State's running back, he didn't take a snap in the second half that mattered until the college football playoff, because they were winning all these games by so much that he would run the first series of the third quarter and he was pretty well done. And so I think that that's something that if you're looking solely at, and the analytics community has done a good job of having essentially sliders to adjust for those type of things. But you might see a guy like Travis Etienne and say, well, he only ran for 900 yards. And then you see this guy from Central Michigan that ran for 1,800 yards. And it's like, well, one of them is winning a game 63-3 and he's taking the entire second half off. And the other guy is in these barn burner action games that go 48-47 and late into the night.
Oh, that's so true. So true. Well, let's get into some guys. I'm going to break it up. I mean, just from a fantasy standpoint, there's the narrative that this isn't a great quarterback class. Coming off of the last years where you had five players get selected in the first round. You had Davis Mills, who came after the first round, and now he looks like he might be a player down in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
You got there are all these guys, and a lot of times an NFL draft is kind of graded by what kind of quarterbacks is putting out there. What how do you compare this class to maybe last year's class, quarterback specific?
I can't. I don't
Yeah.
think there's any comparison between this year's class and last year's class. Now, certainly we didn't see the production out of last year's class as rookies that we were hoping to see, and that colors it a little bit. I struggle with this class because I want the league to tell me if one of these guys are a top 10 talent, because right now, you remember back to the David Carr, Teddy Bridgewater draft class where it seems like traditionally, like you think about like Blaine Gabbert and Jake Locker class, like guys got pushed into the top 10, but that was the one class, that Derek Carr class and Teddy Bridgewater, where teams were willing to wait. And they just said that there's enough depth, nobody's differentiating themselves. And so we're willing to wait until the back half of the first round, early second round. And so the first thing that I want to see on this class is, are any of these guys actually top 10 picks in the NFL draft? If we get to that point and the NFL's got putting 2 or 3 of these guys into the top 10, I think that might change how I would view this class in terms of super flex rookie draft and things like that. Right now, there's nobody that is standing head and shoulders at the top of the class, which that can go two ways, because that could say, well, there's depth in this class. There's a lot of good players, but especially at the quarterback position, if nobody's doing that, that's kind of a red flag to me that is saying that there's no clear cut top player. And so putting value on that in a fantasy aspect is difficult. I think that a lot of these guys have tools of what you want to see in the fantasy aspect. Kenny Pickett can run a little bit. Malik Willis can run a lot. And Matt Corral kind of brings some of that. And even Desmond Ridder brings some of that gets you excited in their production in the rush game. And that's what all these NFL teams are looking for right now. These mobile quarterbacks that are able to move the pocket, get some rush yards. And that's what we really want in fantasy too. So there are some of those guys in this class. It's just that at this point in time, do you have Malik Willis as your top guy, and then he turns around and he goes in early round 4? I mean, we just don't know.
And on top of it, especially considering the fact that really Mac Jones is the only of the first round quarterbacks that really was was a starter from start to finish, and had a good year. We definitely didn't see what we expect to see out of Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields. I think we all really love that potential. I mean, I know you got to see Justin Fields like crazy, and I think we're both pretty much fans of his talent. We're just hoping he gets a good offensive coordinator and quarterback coach down there. Please, por favor. We need good quarterbacks. We need more quarterbacks, please. How about the running backs in the receiver class? Kind of how did they stack up?
So I think the running backs stack up pretty favorably to last year's class. And so you look at last year's class, there were kind of the big 3 with Najee Harris, with Javonte Williams, and with Travis Etienne. I think you can kind of make the case that there's the same with this class, with Breece Hall, with Isaiah Spiller, and with Kenneth Walker, kind of separating at the top. A lot of people really like Kyron Williams, and it does kind of fall in line with last year, where he's kind of sitting at that as that Michael Carter guy who might end up at your top half of your second round as a smaller back, but also brings the pass catching ability. James Cook is a guy that I really like a lot. He didn't put up big production at Georgia, and he's a senior, so the analytics community is down on him. But you hear the name Cook, it's because he's Dalvin Cook's little brother, and he's shown him the ability to make plays in the passing game. And also, if you watch the national championship, he's shown the explosion that he broke off a 70-yard run against Alabama's defense. And so he's able to make plays. Damian Pierce, another guy you got on your sheet here. And I think he's a good guy, that he's a solid. He weighed in at 220 the Senior Bowl, which is what you would love to see. You really want these guys to be in that 220 range, because that's where you can kind of lean towards a every down role. And that's the guy that he's showing pass catching ability. And so, but there's so many. I think I look at, there's a big 3 like there was last year, but last year we really kind of fell off, where Ronnie Stevenson was a good find. Elijah
Mhm.
Mitchell was a good find, but it didn't seem like we had too much depth. This year, it's like there's like 20, 30 guys that you can talk yourself into. And once we
Wow.
really get some testing and some Senior Bowl, Abram Smith is the guy that I really like, but he on tape and on the program, he was supposedly a 220-pound guy. He weighed in today at 211. Jerome Ford was another guy out of Cincinnati that had that same profile, that 220 pounds that you're looking for, and he weighed in today at 209. And so once we get this information about where these running backs really land on the measurables, guys will begin to separate themselves. But I do think that there's a depth in this class of guys that are the bigger backs that we didn't really see last year that are able to take the early down roles and fall into production and getting 20 touches a game.
And the receivers, I feel like you said you really like this receiver class.
I do really like this receiver class. There's no Jamar Chase. And I think that that's the biggest takeaway, that when people are down on this class, because you look at last year, and arguably the best player in this class probably would have gone about 6th or 7th in your draft last year as a rookie. But part of that is because the guys last year were exceptional talents. 2023 is a similar case where maybe the guy this year would probably go 6th or 7th in 2023 because there's so many exceptional talents coming up. But it's kind of unfair to this class because there are a lot of very good, productive players that are available. Treylon Burks is everybody's favorite wide receiver on Twitter right now, and he projects as that typical X wide receiver who kind of almost an AJ Brown, if you're put your mind there, that we all love in fantasy football. Garrett Wilson's the guy. He's my favorite wide receiver. He's my wide receiver one. He's a little bit more in the Justin Jefferson mold, where he's not that big wide receiver that's going to body you up like AJ Brown, but he's got that flexibility that he can work throughout formation. Kind of like Cooper Kupp a little bit, kind of like Keenan Allen, another guy out in your neck of the woods that is able to work out of the slot, able to work outside, and really ends up with a high volume role. Jameson Williams is a guy that I'm higher on than a lot of people because he's got that explosive factor, and he tore his ACL, and so that's going to hurt him a lot, but he was expected to crack 4.3 and come in, and if he would have been able to run at the combine and run sub 4.3 based upon the GPS tracking data that's available on him, that would have opened up a lot of eyes, especially at 6'2". Now that's a guy that he was stuck down the depth chart at Ohio State, and people use that as a black mark, but you're seeing potentially 3 wide receivers in front of him at Ohio State that are also going to be first round picks. And then the other guy that needs to be mentioned would be Drake London out of USC, another guy in your backyard. Yes. And he's that big 6'5", 220-pound wide receiver. He falls in. You look at him and you see the Mike Williams or the Mike Evans and Mike Williams too frame of a guy that can win downfield. The thing about him though, USC used him a lot in the slot, and USC gave him a lot of volume, a lot more volume than what you see. I'm not sure if the downfield ability explosion is quite there like Mike Evans would be, but if you're just kind of not quite Mike Evans, that's pretty good. And then the other guy was George Pickens. He was hurt this year. He had an ACL injury, and so he missed most of this year. He was able to make it back. He made a big play in the national championship game. And he's a guy that, maybe it's just the Georgia jersey, but he's got that 6'3", that 200 pounds, at wiry, wearing a Georgia jersey. Really reminds me of AJ Green. He's probably not that top end of athlete that AJ Green was, but it's one of those things that you see the mental picture and you get the vision in your head of, hey, I feel like I've seen this guy before. And so that's kind of where I land with him.
Oh, awesome. Well, you already kind of tackled some guys, so I think what we'll do, we'll start with the quarterbacks, guys that we haven't really talked about a lot. If you could just kind of give me, we'll throw out a name, and then just give me a little bit, 30 seconds to a minute, and if you got a comp on the guy, your favorite things you like about him. Start with Kenny Pickett at Pitt.
So the thing I like about Pickett is he's got the NFL size that you want to see, 6'3", and he's got he can run with the ball, and so there's some great highlights out there that he had one crazy juke that I think I think they retroactively outlawed the move because he gave himself up, but like went back up and he
Yes.
just kind of roasted a guy there. And so he's got that, called the Konami factor, but the ability to run with the ball that you want to see. So I think some concerns with him. He didn't really have production until his senior year. And I think that kind of raises a red flag a little bit, especially at the quarterback position, because did this guy simply need to be older and more experienced than everybody else at this level in order to really have that production? And so that raises concerns there. And there's also concerns about his hand size, which ends up being kind of a big deal at the quarterback position because it does kind of portray to success at the position.
It does. I mean, you got to hold the ball. It's that simple. You just got to hold the ball.
Yes.
Well, you talked a little about Matt Corral. Anything else you'd want to add, or do you have a comp on him?
So my comp, it's probably low for his ceiling, but he reminds me of Gardner Minshew in terms of, I think he's more talented than Gardner Minshew and he can do more than Gardner Minshew, but it's just kind of that play style where he plays with his hair on fire. He's able to run a little bit. He's not going to be Justin Fields out here, but at the same time, he is able to run with the ball a little bit. And so that helps, especially in terms of fantasy. But he's just a fun player. And so I think that he's better prospect than Minshew, but at the same time, there are things that leave me in his game reminding me of him.
Oh, okay. Well, one guy that I'm really intrigued by, and I think he's more of a project, is Malik Willis. Just incredible physical tools. Kind of reminds a little bit of Trey Lance. But what are your thoughts on him?
The polish isn't there as a passer, and so that's a concern to me. I've said throughout the year that what I see with him is a guy that is an SEC level athlete, that he should be starting at an SEC school, and he was playing at Liberty in Hugh Freeze's offense, and Hugh Freeze is one of the best offensive minds in college football. And so I think I think he's a talented guy, and I certainly understand for fantasy purposes being excited about him. I don't know if he has the development as a passer to ever really get there as a guy that you can rely on. The comp that I've seen on him would be Cordell Stewart. And so if you're going way back, that athlete, and we saw Stewart never really kind of got there as a passer, but he was the explosive athlete that was able to make plays happen. And so that's going in the Wayback Machine. But that's one that I've seen thrown out, and that kind of stuck.
Yeah, I remember I had Cordell Stewart on a team after his breakout, and it was not fun. It was not fun because they had kind of figured him out a little bit at that point. So, yeah, bad memories. Sam Howell, coming out of North Carolina.
So he's a guy that, if you look at the numbers, he ran a lot, but if you actually watch him play, he doesn't really have the athleticism that projects to the NFL level. He's a guy. I can't get past Baker Mayfield with him. When I look at the way they play, I like him the most out of the quarterbacks in terms of the ability to him and Carson Strong are right there, and the ability to throw the ball, the ability to put it where it needs to be. Now, Howell measured in today at 6 feet even, so he's a little bit on the small side. But he's one of these guys that, if you remember back to when Baker Mayfield was in college, he would show the ability to get out of the pocket and make plays. The problem was that didn't really translate to the NFL level because that space just wasn't there to be able to do it. And Howell's when he did run, he's a very physical runner, and that's not going to hold up at his size in the NFL level. So he's got functional athleticism to be able to play the position, to be able to move in the pocket, but he's not going to be a guy that's going to be running out here for 40, 50 yards a game.
You mentioned Carson Strong a little bit, having one of the better arms in this class. Also, he's coming out of same college as Colin Kaepernick. Obviously, he's a very different player than Colin Kaepernick, so I'm not going to ask you to comp the two of them. But what are the thoughts on Strong?
So he's he's a old school. He's a prototypical NFL passer where a comp that I love that I heard on him was Drew Bledsoe.
Ooh.
Or, when I watch him play, he's kind of got a little bit of a different delivery. And so I've seen Ben Roethlisberger, but Ben Roethlisberger was an athlete when he was a rookie. And I think people kind of forget that a little bit because we've got the image now of Ben Roethlisberger in our minds. But another guy that kind of reminded me of him, Phillip Rivers, where you watch him throw. It's his release is so quick, but he doesn't go over the top like you're used to seeing. Really, it's really just kind of it's not the shot put that Rivers does, but it's just a different motion. But he's able to get the ball out so quick, and his arm talent is phenomenal. I think he's got the best arm in the class. It's just that there are concerns with his athleticism. Now, he had a knee injury that he came back from, and I've heard conflicting things about the long-term worry on that knee and coming from a smaller school. And it's just one of those things that NFL teams right now are craving athleticism at the position. And so to have kind of that old school guy that doesn't bring you the athleticism that went to a G5 school, it's going to be very interesting to see where he lands in the draft.
So last one, and this guy didn't really help himself in the FBS Bowls, was Desmond Ridder out of Cincinnati.
Yeah, that's a guy that going into that Alabama game, I said that he had the best chance to improve his stock of anybody in the college playoff, and he didn't do it. And so he's a guy that Cincinnati's close to me, and I've pulled for him, and he's played a lot of football. He's played a lot of high-level football, and so you want to see him hit. He's got athleticism that you want to see out of the position. It's just there's major concerns about accuracy and processing when it comes to him, whether or not he's going to be able to do it at that level. But he's an athlete. He's played a lot of football. You love to see a quarterback that's played a lot of football, seen a lot of action, and I do think that he's probably going to land in that late third, early fourth territory where a team might draft him potentially very Davis Mills-esque, where a team might draft him as a project and maybe he ends up hitting, but he's certainly not going to be a guy pushing towards the back end of the first round.
Yeah, maybe he's Davis Mills, Kirk Cousins type, that guy you get later.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's go to the running backs. And you actually kind of covered a few of them. I'm going to start with one, and then I'm going to ask you to give me comps on the others. Kenneth Walker is getting a lot of love in places like PFF and other places in the draft community. Thoughts on him?
He's an excellent running back. He really broke out this year. Obviously, he won the Doak Walker Award. It's kind of weird that he didn't have that production at Wake Forest, and he just kind of popped in 1 year. And so that kind of raises your eyes a little bit. It's hard for me, a comp for him. I feel like I should have a comp for him, but I'm not quite there on him to be able to have a comp yet. I've watched the guy so much. Melvin Gordon was my comp, during the season. He kind of reminded me of Melvin Gordon, where, and I guess maybe that's where I'll go. That kind of player. So.
No, I like it. I like it. Very similar size and everything like that. If these numbers that I found on the internet, numbers being height and weight, are similar to what we're going to see at the combine. It seems like a similar build to kind of maybe like Devin Singletary, a little bit like that. But yeah, definitely Melvin Gordon. You mentioned Isaiah Spiller. You talked a little bit about him. He's a little bit bigger at 6'1". Who do you kind of compare him to?
So he's got excellent feet, and he's the comp. He's not him, but would be Le'Veon Bell potentially. If you watch him play, he kind of was one of those things where he's able to pick out yards, and he doesn't really pop on the top end in terms of speed, but he's able to find space, and he's able to keep the ball moving. He's able to stay on his feet. He's able to deliver a blow, and he's got they didn't use him a lot. They could have used him a lot more in the passing game, but he's made some really good catches in the passing game. And so that's kind of like that Najee Harris type, that Le'Veon Bell type, where he's not the athlete that's going to wow you, but he's got NFL feature back size, and he's shown utility in the passing game.
And those guys are money for fantasy. They're fantastic. How about Breece Hall? You talked a little bit about him. Any comps
Yeah, I
for him?
think Breece Hall is sitting as my top running back right now. I don't know. I've seen some very aggressive comps that have him as Jonathan Taylor. I'm not there at all. That just seems crazy to me. But I'm a guy that I'm a big same school comp guy, because I believe that the recruiting departments at schools are looking for types of athletes, that guys that fall in line with what they're used to. And so David Montgomery was the guy that came right before him. I think a more explosive David Montgomery is probably a comp that I've seen that I think is pretty fair. And so I'm comfortable going there. I think he's going to be, right now, I think he's going to be the first back off the board. It's one of those things that there's such a wide swing on, does he end up as the back in Arizona? Does he end up as the back in Buffalo? Or does he end up circling back to the top half of the first round and, you're stuck on one of these bad teams?
It is so funny. I almost feel like I get over the excitement of the NFL draft after like one or two picks, because I know no running backs are going to be picked, or maybe one is going to be picked in the first day, and that really the action is going to be in the set rounds 2 and 3. And I'm just like, okay, I'm going to watch tomorrow and see who I'm going to be drafting in a few months. And that's when I grew up. It'd be like, the Heisman Trophy winner was always a running back, and inevitably he'd be the number 1 pick in the draft. Tony Dorsett, Earl Campbell, those guys.
John Carter.
Oh my God, that one was just. That one's still painful. That one is still painful, but oh man. So you talked a little bit about Kyron Williams, a smaller back. Who do you kind of see him compared to?
I worry about him. Everybody loves him, but I worry that when I watch him, he's so small, but he's the type of back that he loves contact. And so I think when a smaller back like that, you want to see him run away from guys. And a lot of times at Notre Dame, the very aggressive comp that I've seen on him is Austin Eckler, but he's not Austin Eckler, and he's not that level of athlete. He's a guy that I'm just concerned about, because if I see a smaller guy that loves contact in college that isn't popping and running away from guys, I don't know if that plays at the NFL level. But I think that you can say Michael Carter for him a little bit, where Michael Carter was a smaller back who loves to hit guys, and he was also very useful in the passing game. And so I think you're going to see a lot of value that places him similar, especially in early Superflex rookie drafts that are done before the draft. But I know that he's a guy that Twitter absolutely loves right now.
And and the funny thing is, I don't love Superflex draft. The idea of Superflex startup Superflex drafts or rookie drafts happening before the draft. I don't see. I'm like, be patient. You don't need to.
I can go both ways, because it for somebody like me, it's kind of rewarding, because I feel like know what I'm going in there, and I have expectations on where guys should go. And I feel like I can do very well in that. I did one last year, and it was wild. We did it in February, and when we got to the NFL draft, it was somebody had taken Jamar Jefferson in the second round, and guys that ended up you were not even taking in the fourth round were going in round 2, and so there were some wild values on that. But it's fun, because it's I think that when you wait for the NFL draft, and especially you get into summer, that consensus mindset kind of sets in. And it's safer picks, and people love to draft within ADP and consensus. But it is kind of fun, especially for somebody like me that has been digging into these players, to do that early draft and see, I'm going to put my chip on my guy, and where is he going to end up?
No, I hear you. Well, I'm luckily the the dynasty leagues that I'm in, they're all doing the rookie drafts after the draft. So
I don't blame you.
I just want to know where the guy is. So gotta love it. Oh, by the way, we got a friend of ours on the show, Bo McGrair. Mr. Picantex, hola, gracias for joining. So two more guys that you mentioned already, James Cook and Damian Pierce. Do you have a comp on those guys? Cook is definitely smaller than his brother.
Cook is little. Cook is very small, and so a comp maybe on him. I think Kenneth Gainwell is maybe a name that gets thrown out. He's certainly taller, but what Darren Sproles was able to do in the NFL, I think that there's maybe some levels of that on what James Cook is able to do. He's so good in the passing game, and Georgia used him in that area of the field. They just didn't. It's one of these that. I look at James Cook at Georgia, and if James Cook were at like Oklahoma State, is James Cook getting like 2,000 yards because they're running the entire offense through him? Whereas at Georgia, he's in a backfield with a bunch of 5-star recruits, and they don't need to do those type of things. But he's made explosive plays throughout the college football playoff and other high level. He's had some injury concerns in the past, but I do have confidence that with Dalvin as his brother, that his body's going to be ready for the NFL because his brother's going to be in his ear on what he needs to do.
Yeah, I love bloodlines. How about Damian Pierce?
Damian Pierce is... So there's utility in the passing game with him. He's also a limited athlete. The concern is there that he doesn't have the top end. He's smaller, but maybe like a Ramondre Stevenson type where he's able to be one of those stronger backs. He measured in at 220 today, and so that's what you really want to see with him. Now Stevenson's certainly bigger than that, maybe like a Damian Harris type back where he can fit in that mold as an early down back, get some utility in the passing game. I don't know that he's the type of athlete that would end up as a true feature back, but I think he's a good rotational player that can have use. And maybe Khalil Herbert might be another guy that kind of to comp him, where we see Khalil Herbert land as a handcuff running back, and when he gets a moment, he's able to shine, but he's certainly not right now standing out as going to be a franchise back.
Yeah, and anybody who picked up Khalil Herbert during the season, he had him for about 4 weeks, and he was pretty helpful. So, the receivers, you already talked about them a lot. I want to ask you about the Ohio State guys, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. What you already talked about Wilson? He's your favorite player. What kind of comps on both of those guys? Both wonderful players, but different players.
Yeah, Garrett Wilson's a guy that he doesn't. You watch him, you know the type of players where you think like it doesn't seem like he's running fast, but everybody's getting further away from him. It's one of those type of things where it's just effortless athleticism and effortless speed, where you watch him run, and sometimes you see guys and you're like, oh man, those legs are going real fast, and like other times they're just moving quicker than everybody else. And so I think that he's a guy that is that for me. And I think that we see a lot right now in the NFL where you don't need to be that traditional bigger wide receiver. If you think back like 10 years ago where there was the Des Bryants and the Andre Johnson, and like that was your top of your fantasy guys. Now it's a lot more, can you quickly separate? Can you do things after the catch? Can you do those type of things? And I think that he's a guy that fits very well in the modern NFL, because really, realistically, receivers aren't getting punished like they used to. And, you watch Debo on Sunday, Debo's punishing people.
Yes.
And so, going back to our childhoods, you had the Steve Atwater over the middle. And, if you went over the middle, you were going to be eating out of a straw that week. But now the game has changed quite a bit. And so I think that that's allowed these guys that are just kind of quicker and able to win in those areas of the field to excel. And I think that he's that type of profile. Olave is a guy that, again, I go back to same school comps, but he reminds me high end of like Terry McLaurin, where he's just like, he's just kind of a football player. And he doesn't really do anything that stands out that makes you say, well, he's the fastest guy or he's the biggest guy. It's just one of these things that he's productive and he fits into an NFL scheme. He's able to get on field. And one of the nice things that Ohio State has done with their receiver room, I'm going to toot my guy's horns, but Brian Hartline, former NFL wide receiver, is Ohio State's wide receiver coach, and he's the best wide receiver coach in America. And what Ohio State does with their receivers is they move guys into each different role. And you don't have one guy that's playing one role. A guy can be an X on one play, a Y on another play, a Z on another play, playing in the slot. And so they have that experience playing all over formation. And so that's one of those things that you just kind of fit him in wherever you need. Like if we've got a big wide receiver and we need a guy to complement that, he can do that. Or if we've got a typical slot and we need him to play on the outside, he can do that. And so I think that's I really enjoy him a lot. I think he's just a kind of a football player.
And and that's the thing. And another guy that I got on the list, Jameson Williams, and that was also coming out of that tree,
Yes.
and he just explodes with Alabama. Hated to see him get hurt in the national championship game, torn ACL. So you're going to miss pretty much going to miss the whole season.
I think he's going to be back. I don't know. I think that the expectation he's going to be back by hopefully the start of the season, if not the first maybe 4 weeks or so.
That's one. I know being back, and then it's being back to who they were.
You're right.
They always talk about how it's like, it's that year plus that second year is when they have everything back. That's why I'm kind of curious about how Saquon Barkley is going to do next year, the second year after the knee surgery. But no, I think he's just an amazing player. Do you have a comp on him?
Jalen Waddle would probably be the easy one, just because he's got that speed. He comes out of Alabama, and so that's the easy way to go. But it's one of those things that everybody kind of looked at Waddle last year and kind of thought that he's just a guy that's going to run 9 routes on you. And I think that we saw that usage in the NFL was very different. And you love to see that for the fantasy aspect, the way the Dolphins used him in PPR leagues, because they got him the ball in space. They got him the ball a lot. And, Ridley's a good comp. I think that he's faster than Ridley. I think that's a good comp by Bo there, but I think he's got a top end that Ridley doesn't possess. But that's a good one too.
I love it. Now, you also talked about Treylon Burks before we got into this. 6'3", if the numbers bear out, very similar build to like an AJ Brown, maybe even a little taller than Debo. Could you see that kind of dynamic physical specimen?
Yeah, certainly. He looks at it. I mean, he plays it. I think it'd be interesting to use him in the Debo role where he can, because Arkansas did that a little bit. They got him the ball out of the backfield. And so he does project in that, especially the way that the league is copycat league, looking for the next guy that can do that. My concern is that people look at the size, strength, and expect him to be like a Des Bryant type wide receiver. And I don't know if I am kind of there on him, because I don't know that he has the technical skills. Maybe those type of guys. I know Arkansas, they stacked him up a lot in formation to try to keep him off press, and he's a physical wide receiver who should be able to beat that. But they did a lot of different things that kind of masks those type of things. And so whether he can do that at the NFL level is going to be an open question. But I do think that there's certainly utility, especially in terms of fantasy football.
And you already gave me a great comp on Drake London with Mike Evans. I love that comparison right there. I think it's nails. Last one I want to bring up, George Pickens, who really helped himself, especially in the national championship game, having that showing that big diving touchdown. What do you see in him? He's another 6'3" guy.
He's lankier. And like I said, he's kind of, if you were to think about, if you go back in time and Julio Jones and AJ Green were in the same draft class, and this would be insane high ends, but Treylon Burks would be your Julio Jones and George Pickens would be your AJ Green, where like they're the same height, but they're completely different wide receivers. But I do think that Pickens has that ability. He's shown a lot of ability to win vertically, to go up and get the ball, those type of things. Whether or not he's going to be a separator at the NFL level might be a question, but he has shown the ability to find the ball in the air, and that's what you love to see with these bigger guys.
Well, I wanted to close out on one last football question that's outside of the draft, and I loved how you owned so much, especially on Twitter, on your Twitter timeline, so much about the zero RB thought process. You were unapologetic, and I loved it. I loved it, loved it, loved it. How did it work out for you this year? And what are your recommendations for this year? Because I'm really starting to I've been hero, not zero, but I may experiment more on zero this year.
Now I would say hero is the way to go, especially if you're not going to be in a super flex league. Then I think that hero is pretty obviously the way to go. I did full zero running back in Scott Fishbowl, and so my first running back I took was AJ Dillon in round 9, I believe, or round 10. My team was, if I had taken the right quarterbacks, my team would have been very good. I made the playoffs. I finished 12th when 10 go on to the second round. So I just fell right outside. My team peaked at the end of the year. I ended up, so AJ Dillon was my first running back I took. I got Debo in like the 9th round. So I had a pretty good squad, and I got Gronk late. I was bailed out because I took Darrell Henderson in the 15th round. And so that gave me a guy that I had a starting running back in week 1. And then by the playoffs, my team was pretty solid because I had Rashad Penny, I had Ramondre Stevenson, I had AJ Dillon, I had Darrell Henderson had gotten hurt. Then I had Devonta Foreman as well. So I had guys, like I had running backs for the playoffs. I think this year was an exceptionally good year to do that strategy because the way that everything fell in place. My quarterback struggled. So I had Ryan Tannehill and I had Russell Wilson as my quarterbacks. And I was in position that I potentially could have had like Matthew Stafford and Tom Brady instead. And so if I were able to go back in time and do those picks, then I might be having a very different conversation right now. So I had in DK Metcalf and I had AJ Brown. And so in the playoffs, like I had guys that popped. And the last week I outscored the guy that ended up winning SFB. So my team was peaking. It was just that I had gotten barely knocked out in the first round.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, I think there's going to be some. I'm going to be having. I may bring you back on when we get closer to draft time, so we could talk more zero RB, especially as you've kind of like, sharpened the saw a little bit more by that point. But yeah, I'm very intrigued by it.
It's all risk appetite, and it's all I think it's hard for people to conceptualize it, especially when you're drafting in early July, because everybody's saying, well, who's going to be my running back? But then you get till week 10 and you're like, well, yeah, I've got 4 guys that I can put into this position because guys get hurt. But it's really just that risk appetite of being comfortable, being uncomfortable, essentially. And you're really just focusing on, it's almost a DFS mindset where you're just focusing on getting a good play for that week or building to the potential of guys who can become those plays and take over for stretches. And you're not so much worried about this running back's going to be my running back for 16 weeks. You're more worried about, do I get 3 weeks out of this guy? Do I get 4 weeks out of this guy? And getting through the season that way and managing it week by week.
And as Bo says, never stop drafting. So keep practice. Practice makes perfect. So last one is a fun one. I can't thank you enough for this. This has been awesome.
I appreciate it.
Ohio, you're Ohio. You're in the middle of America. I have heard from people that they've been able to find some good Mexican food in Ohio. What are your favorites?
So I'm a guy that I really like a good pineapple chicken with I like a good you wrap it up with this pineapple chicken. I don't like a lot of different food, like different flavors going on in my food, but I like to go for the sweetness there, where I've got the pineapple chicken and some melted cheese and in a tortilla. and that's the way I like to go. I do run into, so I'm gluten free. I'm a celiac, and so once you get kind of I don't know if it's a language barrier or culture barrier or what it is, but I've had problems with explaining fully what I really need out of the meal. In we have some great authentic Mexican restaurants, but I have problems with my allergy of explaining what I really need. And so I've gotten sick after some of those. But there are some great ones around here, but that's where I would go. I like a good dish like that.
Well, yeah, corn tortillas are gluten free. So yeah,
Yes.
they're the best friend. And actually, I believe Primo our Primo Bo is a big corn tortilla fan. So I'm a big corn tortilla fan too. So I love the flour too for different. But that's going back to my kid days where I just put a slab of butter on it and just that's
right.
that
my daughter's favorite is just a flour tortilla. She'll just smash. That's all she wants for a meal, a flour tortilla. But I agree. Team corn all the way.
Oh, give the corn. It's so much better for you. It's so much better for you. So do it. And one last one from Bo that he dropped earlier. Bien guapos ustedes dos. Good looking guys, both of you. So muchas gracias, Bo. Muchas gracias. Thank you for joining us in the chat. Jeff, this was a blast. In Spanish, we would say un gran placer. Such a pleasure. Please, I know I dropped your Twitter handle at the beginning. Please make sure to give us a quick rundown of where people can find everything, all of the great stuff.
Yeah, so on Twitter, for whom J Bell tolls, the number 4. You can find me with football guys. You can find me. I've got content up on Fantasy Pros, a couple more articles coming out. And then unfortunately, I will be stepping away from Fantasy Pros to focus on football guys and on the Debbie Royale on Tuesday nights at 9:30. And we have some other special surprises that are right around the bend that will be coming out soon. And then coming off the edge, my friends and I, Corey Spala, Nate Polvo, and Chef James Kress, we do it at 7:00 on Tuesday nights too. We get together and we just kind of hang out. It's one of those things that we don't have any real plan on our show. It's just a group of friends that we just said we're going to take an hour out of our week to spend together and we'll do it on a show. But it's really just more about having those relationships.
Oh man, and you know what? I'm friends with a couple of those guys. Somebody ever needs to take a night off or something like that, you just shoot me a text and see if you need somebody to come in and just
Will do, man.
Shoot the breeze and everything like that. Okay. Thank you, muchas gracias, Jeff.
Thank you.
And familia, eso es todo for our show. Special thanks to YouTube for putting us out there, putting us live. Please make sure to give us a like and subscribe. Also, please make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Familia FFB. You can find me at Jorge Martin 17. Big shout out to Anchor for putting our independent podcast out on Apple, Google, and Spotify. So please give us a like and subscribe. And if you give us a review, I know you're going to give a 5-star review to this episode because Jeff would just really brought the calor. It was caliente. It was great. And I know we need calor in Ohio right now because it's cold. But muchas gracias otra vez. Everybody, remember, todos somos familia. Salud.